Alrighty, and welcome to the first episode of the Tiskin podcast. This is a podcast dedicated just to Thousand Suns. I am David, also known as Crazy, or sorry, not
Ha
Crazy.
ha.
I am David, also known as Prodigal Sons, on the Thousand Suns Reddit board.
And
And
I'm Mike. I'm also known as Crazy Mage on the Thousand Suns Reddit board.
and the two of us are going to try getting together here. Probably start monthly, or we'll get together every so often here and just kind of jump in and talk about topics that are just about Thousand Suns. Right? Just that's it. Or maybe we'll wander
Well,
into some other stuff.
Thousand Suns and Thousand Suns accessories, of course.
Yeah, exactly. Which is a lot. So you're probably wondering who these guys are. I have been playing Thousand Suns for 2 years, so I'm a bit of a rookie. I have been, even though the last year I have been playing pretty much competitively in lots of ITC tournaments. I pretty much have been playing Thousand Suns purely for competitive purposes here. I also dabble with some Chaos Space Marines. I play Zinch Demons. You know, your typical armies that you kind of collect that are on the guest list of Thousand Suns. And Mike, I think you have a little bit more experience with the game than I do.
Yeah, probably. So I've been playing for almost 12 years now. I sort of took the long road to get to Thousand Suns. Started with Eldar way back in 4th edition. But I started playing Thousand Suns about 4 years ago, though not competitively. It's mostly local campaigns and such. But by far, always been one of my favorite factions, and so I was very excited that they finally got sort of the justice they deserve in terms of support and codexes, and of course new
Absolutely.
models.
So the latest right now for our first podcast, Chapter Approved 2018, just came out about a month ago or so. So the dust has kind of settled off.
Yeah.
Why don't we kind of jump in, Mike? What are your thoughts on the changes that Thousand Suns
Well,
had?
for the most part, as Thousand Suns really came out really good in this change to the points. Cultists went up by a point, but I mean, to be frank, everyone took Cultists. We all knew it was coming. But Land Raiders got a huge point reduction. Spawn are down by about 33% of their original points cost. Defilers are down almost 50 points. Um, all the other Chaos Demon engines are down about 20 points apiece. It's just Rubric Marines are down 2 points a model. Even the Flamers on the Rubric Marines are down, so they're actually a viable option compared to where they were. It's just kind of amazing that they'd rebalance Thousand Suns the way they did, especially in light of the fact that Thousand Suns is actually, as far as I understand, one of the more popular tournament choices because of the sheer versatility that the list provides you.
Well, we'll get into some of the tournament stuff, but you'll also have some of the purists say that running Thousand Suns as a supreme command detachment is kind of the MO of the army at the moment, and not exactly Thousand Suns, right?
Well,
You got to get those Rubric Marines in there, and it's actually really funny how opinionated the Thousand Suns community can be, and that it's not Codex Zangors, it's not what is it?
I,
Codex Supreme
I will
Command
admit I'm
and all
somewhat
those
of a
different things.
grognard in that capacity. I'm a purist. If it's not wearing power armor, it's not a Thousand Sun. Or
I love it.
wearing armor of some varieties. The cultists, Zangors. No, thank you.
Yeah. Well, I for one welcome our new Zangor overlords.
Well,
So, you know.
goat lovers, I swear.
So getting back onto chapter approved, I think one of the things that's really interesting actually it wasn't even something in the Thousand Suns Codex. It's one of the Forge World units that I think a lot of people, for the longest of time, have been waiting for GW to give some love to, and give us some natural rules for, and that's the Contemptor
Yeah.
Dreads. If you haven't seen them, the Thousand Suns from the Horus Heresy line have these amazing different specialized Thousand Sun Contemptor Dreadnoughts. which have rules in 40K, but they are generic rules that are adapted from Chaos Space Marines and all the likes of the other folks that can actually take them. But the interesting thing I found about the Contemptors is the fact that they not only reduce the cost of the Contemptor, but they also reduce the cost of the Butcher Cannon, and they reduce the cost of the Havoc Launcher. And all of those, when you add them all up, bring it down into a range that's really, I think, really compelling. So you originally, if you go back before the Codex, most of our options for long-ranged, relatively long-ranged, heavy support were Defilers or Forge Fiends or Predators. Those were basically your option. I guess you could say a Land Raider.
Nah,
But,
Land
the
Raider's
fact
not
that they cost so much
a
money.
long range support.
Exactly. No one's really messing with that thing. So you look now at where this thing slots in, and it's if you just take it without the Havoc Launcher and you just take it straight up with Butcher Cannons, it comes in at 138 points. And what's really interesting about that is that if you're taking, say, a autocannon heavy bolter Predator, you're at about 150 points. And the Dreadnought has pretty much the same T7. He's got 10 wounds, so he's maybe not quite as, doesn't have quite as many wounds, but he's got a 5-up invuln.
Mm-hmm.
Just natural 5-up invuln. And the Predator doesn't have that. And with the number of things out there with, las cannons and the availability of AP and high damage weapons, I mean, Knights are running wild right now.
Mm-hmm.
You really have to start looking at those things and going, geez, for that 138 points, that might be a better option at the moment than running those Predators. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think the Contemptor Dread also provides a little more maneuverability than the Predator does. Most because the Predator is going to, well, is traditionally sort of, you want to sit in the back, snipe with it, whereas the Dreadnought, even though it's not necessarily specialized in shooting if you don't give it, well, into close combat, isn't necessarily completely defenseless if attacked. And also, the Butcher Cannons, because you're just running two sets of them, effectively give the Dreadnought a little bit more focus than the traditional, either the autocannon heavy bolter setup or the Tri-Las at a much lower points cost.
And the other thing that gets overlooked is their base ballistic skill is 2+.
Yes.
And at that, I mean, that is really hard because you need mobility.
Mm-hmm.
So you can essentially think of it like a Predator that can a Predator with a 5-up invuln that can basically walk around wherever it wants. And if it gets into close combat, smash captain charges it or something like that. Well, I've got a 4-up invuln, so 50% of whatever gets through, I should save, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So those were really neat. The other thing that I've seen a lot of, and this might be a good thing for us to dig into a little bit, is that Mutalith Vortex Beast. we received that unit in the Codex last year, which was great because it really kind of gives Thousand Suns like a Mauler Fiend-esque type unit that's specialized for them. But the interesting thing that I learned last year playing with them was you can't really play them as Mauler Fiends. The Mauler Fiend is definitely set up, and also, that got a point reduction, as you mentioned. The Mauler Fiend is set up to be 100% just go get them. Right? It's like the doggy you send out there to just go sick them. The Mauler Fiend's a little different, right? Or the Vortex Beast is a little bit different in that its powers that it has are geared for supporting other units. And the other units we have, being Zangors, fit really nicely along with it. So what I found in the last year of just testing out, running 3 of them, 2 of them, different numbers of them, personally I found that running at least a 1-to-1 ratio of Vortex Beasts to Zangors, I wouldn't exceed that. So the only reason I would bring 3 Vortex Beasts is if I had 3 units of Zangors, or big units. But I think you can even get away with maybe, a lower ratio than that, right?
Yeah, I mean, my ratios tend to be a little more, I guess, focused on having more bodies on the table. So I always liked the idea of 2 units of Zangors for each Vortex Beast because it gives you a little more flexibility with getting your troops out. But the Vortex Beast is actually a fairly interesting monster. It plays a lot like some of the Tyranid monstrous creatures in that it's not necessarily super good in close combat, but it's actually pretty tough. toughness 7, 14 wounds, 3 up save, 5 up invuln, and it regenerates for free a wound a turn. And then its abilities, all of them are very useful. It has a Nova, which strips a mortal wound off every unit within 9. It has the ability to add to strength, add to AP. I mean, really, the only one that's sort of iffy might be Maelstrom of Madness, but even then, if you combine that with like Treason of Tzeentch, it gives you, or even other debuff leadership bombs. It's even that it's a very useful ability.
But I will tell you what disappoints me about the Vortex Beast. It's what it doesn't have, and it's a keyword it's missing.
Oh yeah,
Demon.
this is true.
It is not a Tzeentch demon, which is disappointing because now you could have had that buffed by something else, which is interesting now that you look at the Mauler Fiend because it is in fact a
Yeah.
demon. So it's kind of curious that they didn't give it the demon rule, but you know, not the end of the world. I mean, you kind of get away with not
Yeah, though
having
I
it,
think that sort of
but
harkens
it's
back to the source of the Mutalith Vortex Beast in that it's really just a plus-sized Chaos spawn with the Chaos portal on the back.
that's a good way of describing it.
Yep.
Yep. So before we kind of wrap up the LV or the chapter approved topic, rubric marines,
Yeah.
are they viable?
You know, I've always considered Rubric Marines to be viable with the right setup, and so with them becoming 2 points cheaper, that puts them in a very nice spot of they're a little more expensive than regular Marines, but they have the Invuln save, they have all his dust, and most importantly, AP -2 bolters. That allows them to threaten almost anything in the game now, with especially with Veterans of the Long War taken into account. And then if you want to play a more aggressive style Rubric Marine, the Flamers, which I've always liked in concept, but even I, in my most, I guess, forgiving of attitudes, I kind of didn't think they were cheap enough to be viable at almost 33 points a model. But now they're like 6 to 26. That's easily achievable. And I really
Mm-hmm.
kind of interested to see if those start seeing play because the ability to advance and shoot the flamers really solves some of the mobility problems that the rubric marines have always had.
Mm-hmm. How so is the right way to run them today? If I'm thinking purely from an efficiency hat on, I mean from playing in tournaments, that's where my head is always at. Is it running 5-man units or is it running 10-man units so I can get that Soul Reaper cannon?
So, uh, I guess to sort of hint at a topic for later in the thing, with the new beta rules, I don't actually think the Soul Reaper cannon is necessarily as vital as it used to be. Um, now, the Soul Reaper cannon is very nice, but I think the with the way the current sort of game is evolving, I don't see 10-man squads being as useful as 2 5-man squads.
What holds it back? Is it just the fact that you've got enough stuff out there that or multi-damage guns that will start chewing through your rubrics and before you know it you're losing stuff to morale, or
I mean,
is it just the fact that you've got the tactical flexibility of sending 2 units to 2 different
so
locations?
it's for me it's two parts. One, I think that the tactical flexibility of having two separate groups is huge, with maneuverability being so important in the current edition and the meta. But also the fact that 5-man squads don't have to worry about being overkilled. For instance, oh no, if they
Mm-hmm.
kill 5 guys, it stops. And then also the fact that, as you pointed out, leadership can become an issue once you start getting full large squad sizes. And as much as leadership bombs aren't currently a thing, it could be very, very bad if your leadership gets dropped a couple, and then you start losing expensive Marines to leadership. I don't think it's
I
the
mean, heck,
ten
you
man
can,
squad is worth the risk.
yeah, and you can turn it around and just say, hey, with the contemptors doing what they're doing or being as cheap as they are, I mean, you could be just getting mowed down by butcher
Yeah,
cannons, right? A smart player is going to look at that and see, well, I'm going to take your all its dust completely out of the equation just by saying, okay, I'm shooting you with something with 2 damage or D3 damage or something
yeah.
like that, it doesn't matter after that whether I roll a 1 for D3 or not.
Mm-hmm.
That you're not going to get that rule. So the smart players out there know to target those. So at least if you're taking those 5-man squads, you're limiting the morale factor on that,
Definitely.
right? So the other thing I like on that is if you take 2 5-man squads, you're essentially getting 2 psychers,
Yes.
right? You forget the sorcerer that's in there. And the other thing that's interesting about it is if you're looking at transports, I think one of the most overlooked aspects of the game right now is the amount of drops that you
Mm-hmm.
have and the battle to be able to outdrop your opponent. And if you have one 10-man squad that you're going to throw into something, well, you can fill out that detachment for a battalion with 2 of those rubric squads. You've got those 2 squads, and you can technically put 2 of those in a
Mm-hmm.
rhino. You can put 2 of those with some characters into one of those fancy assault drills that we are allowed to take from Forge World. And that right away, you can technically take what would be 5 drops or 5 units and get 1 drop out of that, and that's a huge boon that you get against your opponents right out of the
Mm-hmm.
gate. And I think that's definitely overlooked because as we know, if you're running a list with like Magnus or something big like that, maybe even a knight, you need that advantage to go first because pretty much every army that's out there right now has the ability to just one shot, not one shot them, but turn 1 or 1 round of shooting on them, just knock them off the table.
Yeah.
It's kind of unfortunate.
Which depending on the mission, the ability to scale your drops is very important. Because if you want to go second,
Yeah,
for
so you
instance,
might need
you
to.
could
Yep.
instead just pulling everything out in the open, and then if for missions where points are scored at the end of the round or end of the game, that could very much be something that you might want to pursue.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up though, because if you do want to go second, could I make the case that winning the drop is good for that because I eliminate my opponent's ability to seize, or I take seize completely out of
Yeah.
the equation,
Mm-hmm.
completely. Like I just say, hey, you're going first. That's the end of
Yeah.
it, because I can make that decision if I win the roll
Mm-hmm.
off, right? So yeah. Aside from that, I think in chapter approved, for the most part, there wasn't. I don't think there was any big surprises. I know that with the rumors that we were tracking, we had a lot of different things out there circulating. There was some stuff about would aspiring sorcerers get full smites, things
Yeah.
like that. It'll be interesting to see if those were things that came from playtesters and that were later, kind of like with the new bolter rules, which we're going to talk
Mm-hmm.
about. If we see them in like a white dwarf issue or something to that extent. But it's really, I think it's really good to see the attention being paid to the stuff that has been suffering, and it definitely feels like GW's listening. The playtesters are listening. They hear the fact that, hey, I've got these tactical marines, or I've got a lot of these options in my army that are right now just not 100% viable.
Yeah.
Or they just don't make a lot of sense for me to take because I end up either being penalized or not. Scarab Occult Terminators right now, I think, fit right into that category because if you look at them point wise versus Rubric Marines, I'm getting more out of it, right? I'm getting a power sword for 1 point more between 2
Yeah.
models. So a Scarab Occult Terminator is a little bit better than a Rubric Marine, but you've got 2 wounds on it. So if I put 2 Rubric Marines together, it's just about the same point cost as a Scarab Occult. So I almost can think of it like I get a free power sword on the guy out of it. The problem is what we just talked about with good players knowing that they're going to shoot with multiple damage
Mm-hmm.
weapons. When they do that, anything beyond 1 damage and each wound that gets through on your Terminators are essentially eliminating them.
Yeah.
Right. So you're almost, if you're looking at the Scarab Occult, they're great models. I have a whole bunch of them sitting on my shelf right now that I want to get into the game, but I have a hard time sitting there saying, I could really use these guys for that.
Mm-hmm.
Or anything where, why don't I just take 2 Rubric squads? I get 2 Psychers, and I fill out my troop detachment, and they're objective secure.
Yeah.
So, I get so many more advantages to taking the Rubrics you kind of get these elite guys sitting on the shelf not even being used. So it's kind of disappointing.
Though I think that's an issue that a lot of armies currently face. Though the Scarab Occult really just have the worst of all possible worlds in that regard, because they're
Yeah, I
competing
think
with
we've been
troops that
seeing
are
some
just so
play.
much better than they are in almost every way.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the Death Shroud Terminators,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or not the Death Shroud, the Blight Lord Terminators that Death Guard have. I mean, those things they're seeing play at some of the lists that are actually winning tournaments. So they are definitely outmatched at the moment.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things you might find this interesting. One of the things that I have found useful for Terminators, and I found this in my Iron Warriors army and in Thousand Suns as well. They're just going to be a little bit more efficient at it. I use them for wiping out when you're facing something like the Loyal 32.
Mm-hmm.
I basically just deep strike the Terminators back there to become these invulnerable death machines against guard. Basically, anything that's just chaff sitting in the backfield. And so if I need to clear screens, if I need to, just basically take guys off objectives, they actually do a very good job of that, because you can literally take on, it doesn't matter how many of those units he has back there, you can pretty much just take those on, and you're rolling 2-ups all day long against those, or even 1-ups in some cases, against las guns and mortars and whatever else they throw at you. So it's kind of a niche little role, and I have found that the Chaos Space Marine Terminators might be a little bit, I'm going to go contradict myself, but might actually be a little bit better the way I have been running them with the Combi Bolters and the Lightning Claws, so that I can essentially re-roll those wounds when I get them into combat and make use of them, versus the Power Swords where it's kind of like, oh, okay, I got more AP. It's great. It's not making me all that much more effective.
Yeah, which has traditionally been the downfall of the Scarab Occult, is that their weapons are sort of schizophrenic in that regard.
Yeah.
But
the other thing that's really interesting, speaking of the elite slots, we have another option in there, which is the Hellbrute.
yes,
And I feel like right now that guy kind of gets overlooked. And you can, right now, here's the great thing. Coming out of Chapter Approved, you can take a Hellbrute with 2 fists for 100 points.
yes, sir.
That's a heck of a bargain.
Yeah, and then if you really want to get dangerous with it, give it a pair of heavy flamers in those fists, and now nobody's going to want to charge that thing, because nobody likes 2 heavy flamers.
That's right. And if you remember, it has that built-in crazed rule where on a 6-up, you get to attack again.
Yeah, and that's once per
which
phase.
Pretty much, if you charge, yeah, exactly. So you could get smited. Okay, you get a chance to have that go off, or you take something on Overwatch. Well, charge phase, fight phase. There you go. Now, you could take something on the charge phase, attack him, and then, oh look, it's the fight phase. I get to fight again. So lots of really good flexibility there. I think the only unfortunate thing about the Hellbrutes is they don't have that invuln save. I think it's okay for the points you're paying for them. At 100 points, it's pretty cheap.
Yeah, Hellbrute is solid at 100 points, but the lack of invuln save has always hurt them.
It hurts a lot of things, especially with the punch of everything that's out there.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the Legion trait for Thousand Suns doesn't especially help the Hellbrute.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. That's kind of the same thing. You have to remember that we're not Chaos Space Marines as the way the rules are written, and even the Legion trait itself, it doesn't. If you reread it, it's based on psychers. So your Hellbrute would have to be a psycher to benefit at all. But that's kind of the nice thing about Thousand Suns, is that our Legion trait can apply to pretty much anything that has the psycher.
Yep.
All right, so let's jump into some tournament talk then. This might not be the most hottest item for Thousand Suns, because we don't. Even though we see armies classify themselves as Thousand Suns in a lot of tournaments, we don't see them technically running traditional or the actual Thousand Suns armies. One of the things I thought would be interesting to kind of talk about is the past season that we've just gone through with ITC. Here locally in Texas, we have a really, really good circuit where we have Houston, Austin, San Antonio, and Dallas and I think El Paso even has is part of the mix as well, where
It is, yes.
we factor those all in, and we kind of have like a mini championship through the summer down here.
Mm-hmm.
And it's pretty interesting because we get to see a lot of different, like each of the cities kind of has their own meta, but in a way, when we show up to these bigger tournaments, there's kind of this no notion of, well, this is what won the last one, and this is what these are the people you're going to see up in the top tier. But every event this year was really cool because we had, I mean, every single one of them just about was a major, which you have to have about 60 something people to reach that. And from a tournament standpoint, that doesn't mean much to, if you're just thinking competitive. But from a scoring standpoint at ITC, it's really cool because you can basically win mathematically. I think you can win. I think it's the overall championship that way. Provided you go to something like LVO or something along that line.
Yeah.
The way the points shape up. But in any case, I thought the tournaments this year were really cool. The first one that really kicked the year off was San Antonio, and I I made the mistake, so I can kind of recap here. I've got some articles I've written about kind of my thought process on what I took going into those tournaments. In between the tournaments, how I was learning, how the Army went. So, like I mentioned from the introduction, I've only been playing the Army for a couple years, but I jumped headfirst into this, just completely open-minded, trying to learn as much as I could. So I had this great idea that, hey, these Vortex Beasts are out. I'm going to bring 3 of them, and it's going to be great. And it wasn't at all. And that's pretty much how my San Antonio went. So I placed very bottom bin there. I played a very good Necron player there, who I beat, but I think I just kind of lucked out in the matchup that, I had some things go my way, and he didn't really have, the destroyers weren't able to get through my Vortex Beasts, and pretty much, I death hexed his Wraiths, and once those were off the table, it was kind of cleanup time. The interesting things happened when I got out of that tournament and got to Dallas. So I went to Dallas with Magnus. I ended up bringing, basically, I think you'll be able to find some articles about what the actual lists were, but, just trying to remember off the top of my head, I had Magnus, I had some, Zangors that were in there, I had some Rubric Marines, I had some Zinch Demons in there too, so I took Screamers. This was with the updated, Screamer profile for their attacks and all of that. Basically, I learned the lesson that pretty much most everybody knew was the fact that if you're going to take Magnus, he's pretty much going to be gone turn 1. And you're pretty much going to be left with nothing on the table to be able to answer for it because you've spent a quarter of your points on him. So I faced a really good player. He actually won the Texas Championship, Matthew Ali, and he between a combination of his Dark Eldar Ravagers and Venoms and mix match of flyers that he had. He just threw just a random assortment of stuff at Magnus, and he was done. Like, Magnus was off the table, and it was kind of like, okay, I still have half my army left to shoot. And I'm kind of sitting there just kind of like, well, this game is pretty much decided, and that's it. And I didn't even get to go yet. And so what's interesting is coming out of that, I made the decision that I'm not going to put myself in a position, or I'm not going to play my army in a way that I have to depend on going first to win. And hence you'll see some of the decisions I made, like, why don't I just bring 90 Plague Bearers? Something that was like, let's just put 90 Plague Bearers out there, take out anything that they could target other than, the Plague Bearers. And I'm just going to make you shoot Plague Bearers at -1 to hit, T4. I've got a 5-up Info and a 5-up Feel No Pain. I mean, you're going to be shooting at them for a long time while I'm smiting you. And that worked really good up until the point that a local player here from Houston basically put a Calexis Assassin out in front and said, good luck, smite everything you want. Okay, here come my Custodes, and look, all of your Plague Bearers are gone. And that was that. So, I kind of went through this, like, extremes of both sides of having too much that could just be killed right away to having too much that was, killed off. And after the tournament season, I basically just decided it's time to kind of step back from Nurgle, find a way to play Thousand Suns in a way that doesn't have a crutch on another army. doesn't require me to, leverage things like plague bearers or, things that are really good for that army, but let's deal with it with the tools we have in house. And so going into LVO, I'm not exactly playing by that MO 100%. I've got a bunch of Contemptor Dreadnoughts and Duradio Dreadnoughts and stuff like that, but I am very much, leaning towards, Vortex Beasts, Zangors, Shamans, Contemptors, those kind of things. It's very hard not to run them as Alpha Legion right now because that -1 to hit, they're going to be shot at. To have that natural -1 to hit on them, I mean, they're not getting much benefit being Thousand Sun Contemptors. So you're going to see my lists basically look like that, where the stuff that I know isn't going to get much benefit from the Thousand Suns, even Psychic Powers and things like that, where I might look at something and say, hey, I could heal it, I could make it -1 to hit, I could give it a better invuln save. I'm not necessarily going to rely on that for those things where I might say, hey, I have 5 of those things. If I'm facing something like the Luda, the new Orc Ludas, I pretty much can figure those things are going to be shot to heck before it's my first turn. And there's not much just a couple Psychic Powers are going to do. So I might as well just have that -1 built in, let them do their thing, and then have my Thousand Suns contingent do its thing. And I know I'm giving up a little bit from a synergy standpoint, but if those two components are doing their job, the army should function pretty well. They kind of complement each other pretty well. So LVO coming up, basically where I'm at is I've got a bunch of Contemptor Dreadnoughts that are Alpha Legion. I've got a couple Duradio Dreadnoughts. I've got a Obliterator, just one Obliterator unit. And then I've got this interesting thing that I've discovered that's really cool. So Castellans and Knights are a big thing right now, right?
Yeah.
One of the things they like to do is they like to make their Knights characters and give them relics. And I think that's really fun. So you probably know where I'm going with this. We have Treason of Tzeentch. But there's another thing. Treason of Tzeentch is one way to deal with it. Another way to deal with it is this relic that Chaos Space Marines have called the Murder Sword. and this is what's so interesting, because I can take a sorcerer in a jump pack with all I have to do is give him a power sword that I can swap out with that relic. So he drops down with my Mutilators. He can basically put prescience on the Mutilators, and while he's at it, let's put Diabolic Strength on the sorcerer. And your opponent's going to go, okay, what are you planning on doing? Well, I'm going to charge your knight with my sorcerer. I'm going to hope he gets through your Overwatch, because if he does, every hit that I land on your knight is going to be a mortal wound. And the fact that you are Imperial, I'm going to get an extra hit. I'm going to have exploding 6s, basically. On top of that, you're also buffing his strength. You can spend a point to cast another one. So you could say, hey, I'm going to go Smite, or you could swap out Smite for, say, instead of just Diabolic Strength, you could, Prescience. Why don't I put Prescience on that, and now I'm exploding 5s. And mortal wounds on 2s. Things like that get really interesting, where this guy can basically get in and gets 5 mortal wounds right there out of the box just from hitting it. And so it's kind of one of those things where there's these little gimmicks that you can find in there that work really, really well. So, but you're going to LVO, right?
Yeah. I'm going to LVO. I actually just finished my preparations list-wise earlier this week, so I'm not actually taking Thousand Suns to LVO. I'm taking regular Chaos Space Marines because I have this.
Yeah, so you jumped in. I kind of dragged you out to some tournaments here at the end of the year, and you kind of took a really interesting approach. So it'd be really cool to kind of dig into how you built this army that you took, and kind of how your first tournament went with it, and the fact that I think this is the army you're bringing to LVO, and what its thing is.
So, I guess to preface this, so I don't consider myself a tournament player. So I decided that if I'm going to be doing this, as I'm going to effectively play this for fun, like and not really take it too seriously. And so, one of the things I like to do with any given army is identify sort of the worst units in a given codex, and then make a list that revolves around them. And then from there, sort of go nuts. And so I identified that there are a couple of units in the Chaos Codex I never see play. The Mutilators, Possessed, Hellbrutes, regular just Chaos Space Marines. And then sort of built a list designed around them, and I figured out that the Chaos Renegades Legion trait is just amazing for all of those units because it lets you advance and then charge. And so I built this, and I'm going to be I brag a little here. Beautiful army by combining various Age of Sigmar Sylvaneth kits with pretty much every other Marine and Chaos Space Marine kit in the game to make this sort of work of art. Every model in it is unique. And then to sort of bring the whole thing together, I examined the stratagems that are available in the Chaos Space Marine Codex and figured out which of them sort of synergize with what I was trying to do, and then picked my support units based off of that, as opposed to sort of doing it the other way around, which I think is what a lot of people sort of wind up doing. And so it's pretty much one of each infantry character in the Codex, the generic ones, of course. 4 Rhinos, 6 squads of Chaos Space Marines, Mutilators, Possessed, Hellbrute, Defiler, who is the sort of the centerpiece of the army, and as many flamers and assault weapons as I can get my hands on. And actually, despite the fact that I hadn't played it up until I actually went to Austin, did very well against anything that wasn't knights. What I've sort of discovered is that as much as I did bring some anti-armor, I just didn't have anywhere near enough to reasonably take them down in an efficient manner. And so actually there were several occasions, the one occasion comes to mind where I broke a knight in close combat and then he exploded and killed my entire army. The game was over in less than 40 minutes. It was awful. Like David was only on his first turn whenever I came over. He's like, "Hey, what's going on? I'm done."
Yeah.
And then the second game versus what effectively was a knight army, it was the chaos equivalent. Literally, all of my anti-tank died turn 1, and so I was left with 15 flamers. So it's like, okay, and just turn them all on this Lord of Skulls and torched it to death, which it died, but it sort of was my last hurrah before getting shot to death by the other renegade knights.
Now that was Goat Boy, if I remember right.
Yeah, that was Goat Boy. That was a
Boy,
fun game.
Goat Boy is who you might know from Bells of Lost Souls, and the irony was I played him in that same, I think the very next game actually.
It was the next game.
I played him as well, and my aspiring sorcerers won me the game against him, where all of my plague bearers, that Lord of Skulls basically went through all of my plague bearers, and we were basically in this death standoff where, you know, he's trying to hold just enough objectives to win, and I'm trying to get him off that objective, and essentially I think I pulled off a Doom Bolt, like a barely in range Doom Bolt at the very end, with like a command reroll or something to that extent, to just barely kill one of the armigers that he had and knock it off the objective. And since I was going second, that was enough where, hey, I hold more at this point. So yeah, he was always fun to play. But you also, I think, had some good matches. I think there was like Tyranids and a few others.
So for that tournament, I had a match versus the two that were sort of, I remember very clearly. Obviously, was I played a good game versus no, the tournament was in Houston. That tournament was Guard was my second game, which is this massive Guard firing line that was centered around a Shadow Sword. which he just had no idea what to shoot at. He'd shoot at my Defiler with a Shadow Sword, and then Hellbrute would run up and just ruin his day. He'd shoot at the Hellbrute, and then the Mutilators would come in and just break everything. Mutilators actually are my favorite unit in the list from just sheer performance.
Yeah, I heard they're awful.
So
That's what I've read on the internet.
The internet and everyone I know says they are the most awful, worst unit in the entire in the codex, possibly the game, because they move 4 inches a turn. They got just random weapons. Right. It's pretty bad. But if you let them actually advance and charge, like the Renegade static does, it actually makes them really fast in comparison to normal infantry, and so they're actually deceptively quick. If your opponent's not paying attention. Plus, they can deep strike if you are worried about it. Oh yeah, no, they earned their points back and then some every game. They're also super cheap at the moment, like 33 points a model or something. Yeah, it's ridiculous.
They're cheaper than Obliterators, which everybody loves because you can just drop down and fire. But the Mutilators, as long as you can get them into close combat, they're pretty much going to break whatever they touch.
Yeah, plus they've got 3 wounds apiece. But then I played...
Do they, by the way, get an icon so you can take, like, the corn?
No, they have no upgrades.
Oh.
So
they're just like Obliterators for that.
They are just like Obliterators. They are 35 points a model. But yeah, they... Pretty much, they are what they are. So... no fancy tricks, but they're a giant sledgehammer and a sock that you get to swing at your opponent's army every once in a while. But played versus 1,000 Suns actually for my third game, which was actually I don't know, it was close, but really I think my opponent very much underestimated just how much board control I could get with my army. He knocked out my Defiler turn 1, which I think he thought was like the biggest threat in the army, which allowed everything else to advance forward very quickly. And I pretty much kept him locked exactly where he deployed the entire game.
Yeah, most people who would look at your army, I mean, the Defiler kind of sticks out because it's this big hulking, tree. And most people would look at it and just go, well, it's big. It's got
a big
lots
gun.
Of stuff. It's got the gun, right? That kind of stuff, and they think, oh, well, that thing's got to go. It's almost like your distraction Carnifex for the army, right?
Yeah, very much so. But the thing is, if your opponent decides to ignore it, it still can pull its weight. Right. And so, actually, I played a game recently versus Imperial Guard with it, where it actually wound up healing almost 30 wounds over the course of the game, if I recall, between its natural regeneration and the various other, I guess, buffs I was throwing on it.
So it heals 1 wound a turn naturally, and then how do you do the rest of it?
A D3 off of... a Warpsmith, and I rolled very well, and we actually went the full 7 turns. And then, so that's 28 total over the course of the game, because I actually went second, which was hilarious. But my last game was actually the most fun and more interesting in regards to your list for that tournament, is I played against a guy who brought 90 Plague Bearers. And... the fact that I ignore his -1 to hit, I had the access to Death Hex, just whooshed him off the table. Because one thing to keep in mind is the fact that, okay, you get charged by Plague Bears. You flame them. Take a step back. You get charged by Plague Bears. You flame them again. And so there's really no reason to ever stick into in a fight or charge into them. Instead, it's just better just... let them charge you.
This is what we're doing today.
Who cares? And so going into LVO, sort of after that, the couple of games I played versus some people here in Houston, I've actually, with Chapter Approved coming out, discovered my list is actually almost 200 points cheaper than it was in Austin.
So what have you done?
Nothing. I've left it alone. All I'm going to do is I bought some extra demons that I intend to summon. I'm going to convert them up to all tree-like, and it's going to be beautiful.
So it's
beautiful the garden.
It's interesting you mention that, because the thing about summoning, at least with the way they've ruled at LVO, that's interesting, is it gets around intercept.
Yes.
even though they are reinforcements, or that you spend reinforcement points, and for the behavior of them on the battlefield, they're
Mm-hmm.
pretty much going to behave like reinforcements. You
Yeah.
don't you can't get intercepted, and you can pretty much tailor what you need, right?
Yeah, so you can tailor what you need, and it also lets you. They did specify you can summon turn 1 and after turn 3,
That's
which
right.
is something that some people have been arguing about, which I always sort of thought that was dumb, that people thought you couldn't do it. Um, and so I actually am sort of looking forward to giving this little grub a try to see
Feels
how he pans out.
feels almost like something that you would see on the text to speech device series, where they, well, I can't summon. The battle is just too far along, guys. I just.
Yeah,
But this is no. There's no need to summon.
nope,
So,
no summoning. We're done.
what do you kind of thinking LVO? What do you expect to see a lot of? What do you expect to
So
encounter?
LVO, I expect to see 3 lists in particular. So obviously orcs are big at the moment. A bunch of sort of high profile tournament players have all very publicly switched to orcs. And then obviously you're going to still see the same sort of combination of Eldar, Dark Eldar, because those are, even with orcs being so good, especially against those armies, they're still very, very good. And then knights are going to be very popular for actually one meta reason that I've actually been pondering about. Knight armies are very easy to transport. They're just
Yes.
five five things, put them in a box, you're good to go. Whereas I'm actually been having some concerns about how am I going to get my army to Las Vegas in one piece.
Yeah, I'm right there with you on that one.
And then, so those are going to sort of, the orcs and Eldar are very obviously going to dominate the high tables. With I think knights are going to sort of maintain their role as sort of the gatekeeper armies. And then I expect to see a whole bunch of people like myself who just sort of showed up for the spectacle of it all.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm right there with you in terms of what I expect to see. I think knights, orcs, Yunari. We'll probably see the splattering of death, blood angels in there.
Yeah,
I don't expect to see very much out of Necrons, or some of the other armies that kind of hang around that middle with Thousand Suns. I think we'll
yeah,
we'll see Thousand Suns in Chaos lists, and I think we'll see some
hmm
Chaos armies do good. I think the majority of them that do will be primarily Alpha Legion based. I think the cultist armies, though, I don't think they're going to be the focus. I think they're
no, I
they're
think
going to be out.
kind of think they took a big hit
Yeah.
with chapter approved, because 150 cultists, now that's an entire unit you can't bring
Yep.
because they
Yep. But I think what
the
that
points
does open
increase.
up for, interesting enough, and we'll see with the next Vigilus campaign that comes up, or the furthering of that with all the hints that are being dropped at Abaddon and Black Legion stuff coming out.
Yeah,
It there are some compelling reasons to start looking at Black Legion as a Legion trait, especially when we get into talking about the Bolter rules and things like that. I
yes,
mean, that army gets real interesting real fast, as an option there. They might be a little more expensive, and I don't think we're going to see them at LVO. But I think maybe going forward into the 2019 tournament season, that's going to be something that we start to see more and more of, which I would welcome. I think that's a great thing.
yeah, especially considering that the Black Legion trait is actually unique among the Space Marine armies. I don't think any of the other armies have anything that's quite like it,
which
and
is
how
the
much maneuverability it provides.
which is the advance and fire rapid fire, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So, um, I think the other thing that, when I look at this from a Thousand Suns standpoint, if I'm coming into LVO and I'm playing a Thousand Suns army, what do I mean, I'm looking at the meta and I'm going, what am I supposed to do versus the the Luda bomb and all the Ludas you got and their grot shields? What am I supposed to do against that? I can charge that, but they're going to have 120 boys that are sitting there in my way, and I don't know that we can clear through that. It becomes a real challenging matchup for Thousand Suns.
Yeah, I think in that particular instance, the against the Luda bomb in particular,
And
um,
and just
you're
so
gonna
people
run into
know,
some issues.
that what we're talking about, what they do is they will take their Ludas, and the Ludas have pretty good stats right now, where they basically have the equivalent of autocannons. And what they're going to do is they're going to sit back and they're going to put a bunch of grots in front of their Ludas, and between you and the Ludas, more or less. And they have a 2 point stratagem that they're going to use. And so basically, whenever you shoot at the Ludas, if you can see them, even if you have indirect fire, you can put whatever you want into them. You're just going to be killing grots. You're not going to be killing Ludas. And that's kind of the hard part there, in that they jump up and they go to shoot at you, and it doesn't matter whether you have minus whatever to hit. Sixes are always going to hit, and the number of shots that they get to shoot is pretty ridiculous.
Yeah.
And you're going to be taking some damage from them, a lot of it.
So strictly speaking, the classic answer to orcs, and if you don't have the numbers to just take them in a straight fight like guard or nids, I guess, is you have to outmaneuver them. And so the main thing is if you can deep strike any unit next to the Ludas and then just shoot at the grots normally, and then hit them with something that they don't get Overwatch against. Particularly if you ally in, for instance, a unit of what are they called? Warp Talons, for
Yeah.
instance, or something equivalent to that, you'd be able to sort of knock them out fairly easily. But
That's a really interesting point.
I think that if the problem with the Luda unit, though, and sort of trying to plan to take it on, is that if you take one thing, you can't take another. And so if you're very specialized at knocking out that particular type of unit, then you're going to wind up sort of suffering against other opponents, which is why orcs are in such a good spot at the moment, is they're sort of their counter meta. Because up until the Orc Codex came out, everyone was very much hyper elite armies with chaff. Whereas orcs, it's all just hordes. Everything's the same.
Yep.
You pretty much, they're all toughness 4, strength 4. They have different guns, but they're all pretty good in the fight. And so you sort of have to figure out how you're going to deal with that many toughness 4 bodies with a bunch of very good support options.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned the Warp Talons, because guess what keyword they have?
Demons.
Demon. But regardless of the fact that they have that demon keyword, what can they also take is a mark.
They take Mark of Tzeentch, of course. Yes, sir.
And if you give them Mark of Tzeentch, I believe one of the things you can actually do is use one of the Vortex Beasts to let them reroll their charge. So that
sounds correct.
That might be a very interesting challenge there for you. Or you could even take the other route to that and maybe use Gaze of Fate. And if you're not familiar with Gaze of Fate, it's the Tzeentch power. And the one key about Gaze of Fate that's different, the wording on it is different than the command reroll. And that command reroll requires you to roll 1 dice. And Gaze of Fate allows you to roll the dice roll. Despite this, personally, I reached out to the organizers, the TOs for LVO, and asked them, hey, just making sure, how are you guys going to rule on this? And they confirmed that you could use Gaze of Fate to reroll both dice for a charge roll. Now, the one key to this is that you do have to reroll both dice. So in the case where you're rerolling a charge roll, it's best to have both Gaze of Fate and a command reroll in your back pocket when you go to do that, or when you go to use it, because you can basically reroll both or one, very much like how I do that with Treason of Tzeentch if I'm taking the leadership test.
Mm-hmm.
So
the other, I guess, good answers for orcs is if you're, I guess, sort of wanting to answer the problem of versatility, is leave some points in reserve, and then a unit of flamers is only power 4, so very, very cheap, and each of them packs a flamer that's strength 4, AP -1. That's also a pistol, so even if you lock them in combat, they keep flaming.
That's
And
incredible.
at T4 with 2 wounds apiece, they're actually fairly durable,
Yep. And
all
they have
things
very good
considered.
maneuverability too. I mean, they
Yeah,
have what, 14, 12-inch movement, something like that?
12-inch movement, and they fly.
Yeah. So you can fall
Um,
back and still shoot and
yep.
do whatever you want with them.
Yeah.
That's a really good idea. So basically, if I'm hearing you right, though, is I need flamers or I need close combat.
Pretty
So
much. Yeah.
so calling corn, corn armies out there. Uh, here's
Yeah.
your
The
moment to shine.
bloodletter bomb would murder the bejesus out of all of that.
Or the berserkers in the whatever delivery mechanism that you can come up with.
Yeah.
You know. Okay, so I think we've talked about the tournaments a bit, and by the time we meet next time, we'll probably be able to recap a bit what LVO was like for us, what we saw, what we experienced. I'll definitely be doing my best to keep track of the Thousand Suns players when they're there, just as I did when I was at the tournaments this year.
Yeah.
And you can check the Thousand Suns Reddit if you want. I'll likely do a live thread in there, and maybe if we can, get the technical bits of it worked out, we might be able to even do some live audio from there and just kind of a live podcast and take some questions and whatever else for the community that we can do to help out. So we'll see if we can make that happen.
Yeah.
So I think that covers tournaments. So moving on. So the last thing we got up right now is we got these lovely bolter rules that just dropped. What is it? Just a day or two ago.
Yeah.
And GW basically decided, hey, you know what? If you've got bolters and you don't move, you can get your full shots.
Well, not just if you don't move. It's also if you're a Terminator, biker, Centurion, or vehicle.
Yeah, so you get it all the time.
Oh yeah, which that's huge. I guess they finally decided that Marines were survivable enough but didn't pack enough punch, which has sort of been the complaint since the new edition came out.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out, because I think, and as we talked about a little earlier in the podcast, the Rubric Marines and the Scarab Cult Terminators, that's where everybody's looking right now in Thousand Suns. I mean, they're looking at those things and they're saying, when can I just bring a whole army of these guys? Because they look great. They're the core of the army. People want to throw them on the table. I think with this rule, I feel the Scarab Cult Terminators, I want to say, hey, I can put these things out there. Someone made a really good point that if you take a full 10-man squad of Terminators and you take 2 Soul Reaper cannons in there with them, I mean, the amount of, and to your point, you don't really need the Soul Reaper anymore.
Yeah.
But let's say you just take all combi bolters that are in there.
Mm-hmm.
That's what, 40 shots that you're getting at your full 24-inch range, right?
Yes.
You got 10 of them.
So
that's
at strength
4,
a lot
AP
of AP minus 2. That's a ton of pain.
That's a lot of shots coming from those guys, and you can prescience them. You got all sorts of psychic shenanigans you can throw on them, but at the same time, I got to look at the Rubric Marines and just say, look, I know that Scarab Cults are going to draw not your strongest fire, but your effective fire from your army to deal with them, and just about every army that's out there has that today. It's such a hard thing for me to convince myself that I need to take a bunch of these Scarab Cult Terminators when I can just take Rubric Marines and I don't care what you shoot me at. I mean, okay, I'll give up the All is Dust rule. That's fine. But I've still got my 5 up, and no matter what you shoot me with there, if it's multi-damage, I'm only losing 1 model per wound that you get through, and you still got to get all those wounds through, and there's lots of them there, so I've got a better shot at my guys surviving, my models surviving, and my shots surviving on the table than the Scarab Cult Terminators, where you could be, for each wound, potentially knocking off 1 model. The autocannon shots, if you think about it, I haven't run the math on it, but I can't imagine that it's a lot of autocannon shots that are needed to wipe a squad of Scarab Cult Terminators.
No, especially considering that same number of shots will not necessarily wipe a squad of regular Rubric Marines just because of the difference in model counts. But There's actually a unit that comes to mind with the new bolter discipline rule. That so obviously Scarab Occult comes out great because they all have combi bolters. The Rubric Marines all have bolters and they're great. But the unit that I'm actually sort of looking forward to, just from my personal army, plus I think you run a lot of these Chaos Rhinos. Give them
Yeah.
they can take 2 combi bolters and a
Yep.
havoc launcher. And so
Yep.
that's just a ton of shots off of your little dinky transport for a
Yep.
very, very nice points cost.
Yep.
And it
And what's great
actually,
is, I mean, it does its job. It transports the guys, and once they hop out, you run the thing over to an objective, and you just sit it there, and then it just
mhm.
sits there and annoys the heck out of the opponent, sitting on the objective, holding it, and it's this big T7 like annoying like tin can sitting there that they can't just put their they want to put their cheap fire into, but doing that is kind of pointless. And so then they have to direct heavier fire to that thing, which is great because it takes away from other stuff that's important.
Yeah. Though the other thing to keep in that I've sort of just cascading off of the fact that Chaos Rhinos just got literally almost doubled in shots at long range, is it actually gives you a reason to use Inferno bolts.
Oh, I don't know about that. I don't know
You
about
know
that.
what? That you say that, but I bet you in sometime this next year there will be a point where it's like, you know what? AP -2 on these Rhino shots might actually be useful right now. It's just
It would be
enough.
okay if it was like let's update it for all of the combi bolters on the vehicle. The problem is you got to spend one for every combi bolter on there. And so if I bring 3 rhinos, that's 6 command points. Just I
Well,
feel like I'm just like pissing away to
keep in mind you can only
on
use
stuff that's going
this.
to be
Well, actually, no. It's before. Wow, it's before
yeah.
battle. That's actually
Yeah,
not
you can
bad.
upgrade as much as you can. No, it's horrible.
No,
Let's
no,
be clear.
that's not bad.
This strategy, no, I this stratagem is like the worst stratagem in all of 40k. Although I've been corrected, I think there are a couple others. I think Tyranids has one that's just completely useless, and I think there's a couple others out there that are just like, what? Why did they put that in there? But this is one of those ones where it's just kind of like, come on, guys, are you? You're just really just insulting us with this one, aren't you?
I don't know. I think I could get some use out of this. Just
If it
surprise
did it,
Inferno bolters. Though I do
I
think
think
it
if it
definitely should be once per vehicle as opposed to once per weapon per vehicle. That's kind of
I
dumb.
agree with that. I agree with that. I think there's some people that say, you know, you could upgrade army wide, and I could see that being something where it's like a kind of like how they did with webway infiltration, where you have different point values depending on what you want to do with it, where you could
Mm-hmm.
spend maybe 1 to upgrade a vehicle or 3 to upgrade army wide. Um, and at that rate, you know, if you're bringing 3 rhinos, you might as well just say, you know, upgrade army wide, and I bring rhinos and predators and stuff like that. And hey, guess what? Now we're talking about some of these other models now having some value there for something like that,
Yeah.
and I might actually do it. But yeah, I think you know, as much as I want to say rubrics are gonna, you know, start hitting the table more or things like that, I think we're still in a state where Zangors are the mo. I mean, they're the prime model to have on the table that can do a little bit of screening and can basically take. I mean, there's a lot of things in the game that don't want to get into combat with Zangors, if you think about it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a vast majority of things actually in the game that don't want to get into combat with them. And I mean, you've got plenty of good options with them. The problem is, you've got to deal with the attrition. You've got to deal with the morale tests that you're going to be taking on those guys, and you know, without something like a Dark Apostle or, you know, psychic tests that, like, you know, things like that that can help them be better, you don't really have an option there to really boost their morale or anything.
Though
So
I
it's kind of the unfortunate downside to them.
I do kind of feel that Zengors and Rubric Marine sort of occupy different niches, though. Because as much as Rubric Marines are troops for 1,000 Suns, and for any other army, they would be an elite's choice. It just happened to be objective secured because 1,000
Yeah.
Suns. And so the Zengors definitely still have their role. Cultists are sort of compete with Zengors for the same spot, though with the
Right.
points increase, I do kind of feel that cultists don't really have a solid place in a competitive Thousand Suns list, mostly because they are so potent in the regular Chaos Space Marine book in comparison.
Yeah, you don't have the shoot again, and you don't have the Tide of Traders
Yeah,
options with
and you
them, so
also
you're
don't
kind
have
of
the access to the Alpha Legion trait.
the -1 to
Actually,
hit,
yeah.
right?
But Rubric Marines, though, I think they are definitely a solid choice in the upcoming tournament season, mostly because they're much cheaper now, which even by itself, before the introduction of Bolter Discipline, is a amazing improvement for them. But then if you add in the Bolter Discipline, they're literally twice as lethal as they were previously, because almost never were you going to be in that rapid fire range unless you're already danger close, and it's either going to wipe him out anyways or you're about to die. And so I think with the inclusion of this, it makes the Rubric Marines much more valuable than they were previously. It almost doubles their effectiveness.
Well, let me pose an alternative to upgrading the rhinos. So if you're taking the rubrics, you're obviously one of the things we have to do is we have to take those rhinos.
Yes.
And this gets back to the point of either you need to reduce your drops, or B, you need something to shield the rubric marines to at least give them that little bit of buffer before they start getting shot. If you leave all these little MSU units of rubrics out there, they're just going to start popping off the table. We saw a guy here locally in the Texas meta use rubrics in assault drills, and he did extremely well. This was the same Matthew Ali that played me with his Dark Eldar. He ran 3 of the drills with a bunch of the rubric marines in there, and he basically, if I remember right, he just starts them on the table, runs them right up, gets the drills into combat, gets the rubrics out, and he's just throwing smites everywhere. He's throwing mortal wounds everywhere. But the interesting thing about the drills is they come standard with 2 Stormbolters.
Yeah.
So you could actually make them AP2 Stormbolters right out of the gate there. I mean, spend 2 command points right now as it is. If they were to throw us a bone and say, hey, per vehicle, I don't know that I would spend the points to upgrade each one. But if they did per vehicle, yeah, I could start hemming and hawing over 3 command points to make those things AP2 bolters when I've got 8 shots per drill. I mean, that's 32 shots, basically a turn. Not 32, 24 shots a turn that I'm putting out from 3 drills that I'm already going to have nice and close. What am I worried about? I mean, they're going to be nice and close, or I'm going to get 4 shots out of them, something along that line. So
Yeah.
I think it's going to help a lot of the auxiliary stuff. One of the things I think that's really interesting is actually on the Land Raiders. It's unfortunate that Chaos only gets one variant of the Land Raider with the las cannons on.
Yeah.
It's kind of unfortunate it's kind of like they got the Land Raiders, and it's kind of like, well, all we know to do is put las cannons on the side of them. We don't know about bolters or anything else. If they had a variant of that had the heavy bolters, or hell, hurricane bolters, or whatever the Chaos version of that is, that would make such a bigger difference for that model, and you'd have such a bigger reason to take that model, because you could put out, I mean, it's T8, T9
T8
for the Land Raiders. So T8 for the Land Raiders. I don't think they have an invuln save, but there are variants of it that do. And you have a model that can basically just, I mean, run around to shoot. Like, give me heavy bolters. Give me the what is it? The what are the quad heavy bolters that
They're hurricane bolters?
Flyer. No. The Fire Raptor has those quad heavy bolter turrets on those things. And why not just say, hey, I'm going to put a couple of those stupid 12-shot heavy bolters on the side of a Land Raider, and you've got the most amazing transport vehicle ever built right there. I mean, 24 shots out of a Land Raider is... I would rock that all day long. I might even just like lose my mind and throw Terminators inside there, just because Why not? You know.
Yeah.
So yeah, but it's unfortunate because I mean that's the kind of thing where with that thing, the number of options that you have right now with Chaos and the Land Raiders is just really disappointing.
Yeah, that's
So
pretty much always been the case, at least as long as I've been playing. The Chaos Land Raiders, well, it used to have a place on the table, has sort of been collecting dust for pretty much the last 10 years.
pun intended, right?
Pun intended.
So the other thing that I think about, we're talking about the bolter rule, and the contemptors, not to beat a dead horse here, but the contemptors also have the ability to take those combi bolters on each of their arms. So
Yes.
I mean, you've obviously got options there as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, but other than that, I think we're basically not going to see very much variation. I think I think you might see actually on sorcerers and the sorcerer and terminator armor. I think those couple of guys, you'll see some options taken there. You'll see like combi bolters or inferno combi bolters taken on those guys that will become a lot more useful because they can get their full force shots out no matter where they are.
Yeah.
Especially the terminator sorcerer. Like that's something we haven't talked about. And going back to chapter approved, that thing, I mean, he's almost your de facto choice now for a headquarter choice outside of Aramon, if you think about it. You take the familiar with him. He costs less than an exalted sorcerer. He gets +1, so he's getting +1 on his first cast. Use Terminator armor. You can deep strike him for free. You've got more wounds. You've got better. I think you have more wounds, right?
Yes, you have one more
exalted
wound than normal.
Yeah. So the great thing is that guy has so many more weapon options. Actually, you know what? I don't know if he does. Let me see. Sorcerer and Terminator armor has. Yeah. So your Sorcerer and Terminator armor has 5 wounds, and your Exalted Sorcerer has 5 wounds as well.
Yeah, but the regular sorcerer only has 4.
The regular sorcerer only has 4. So if you're looking at the Terminator sorcerer versus the Exalted sorcerer, that in that point range, those are the two you're looking at, right? You're either weighing that option of, hey, I need some rerolls, and that's really all you're getting out of the Exalted, aside from some ballistic skill. But again, what are you going to do with the added ballistic skill on him? You don't have the option to take anything like a combi bolter or a inferno combi bolter on him or anything other than like a pistol.
Yeah.
So you really, that increased ballistic skill is going to waste. Mm-hmm. So unless you're going, I mean, if you're going to go close combat, okay, you can make a case for the Exalted Sorcerer, especially with Seer's Bane. But outside of that, man, it's like de facto, choice 1 for me right now is that Sorcerer and Terminator armor.
Yeah.
So, well, I think that pretty much covers the combi bolters, and that actually will do it for episode 1. So,
yeah, sounds. I think we pretty much covered everything.
So hopefully we've been able to at least entice some folks to come back for the next one.
You betcha.
And we'll catch you then.
Yeah. And remember, Magnus did nothing wrong.